The small town of Ridgemont, North Carolina, seemed like a peaceful place with quiet streets and tall trees swaying in the breeze. This was where Eric Bradley, a special agent with the FBI, had chosen to raise his children after years of intense investigations in major cities. He believed the town offered safety and a chance for normalcy for his family. Eric was meticulous, disciplined, and deeply connected to his wife, Sharon, and their two kids, 15-year-old Miles and 10-year-old Layla. Their home was in a middle-class neighborhood where Eric was still trying to integrate into the community. Despite being a highly skilled professional, Eric preferred to keep his work low profile, often introducing himself simply as a public servant. But not even his badge could shield him from the reality he would face on that summer afternoon. That day, Eric was returning from a work trip. Sharon had taken Miles and Layla to the park for a picnic. The kids were running joyfully among the trees while Sharon sat on the grass, reading a book. It was an ordinary day until a patrol car slowly drove by the park, and the two officers inside fixed their gaze on the family. The officers, veteran Sergeant Bill Reeves and his younger partner, Officer Josh Carter, had been responding to a flurry of anonymous reports about suspicious individuals in the area. Reeves, infamous for his history of aggressive and biased policing, saw Sharon and her family as his next target. Without any clear reason, the patrol car turned around and parked near the picnic area. Reeves and Carter stepped out, their hands resting on their holstered weapons. They approached Sharon, who initially didn't notice the tension, and greeted them politely. "Good afternoon, officers. Is there a problem?" Sharon asked, trying to stay calm. "We've received a report about suspicious behavior in this area. Would you mind showing some ID?" Reeves said, his tone cold and condescending. Sharon was visibly taken aback, but maintained her composure. "Suspicious behavior? We're just having a picnic. Here's my ID." She handed over her driver's license. Miles, observing the interaction, noticed the officer's hostile demeanor. He stepped closer, speaking up. "This doesn't feel right. We didn't do anything wrong." Miles' comment irritated Reeves. "Quiet down, kid, before you make this worse for yourselves," the officer said, stepping closer in a threatening manner. At that moment, Eric arrived at the park. Parking his car, he immediately noticed the scene. The officer's posture, Sharon's uneasy expression, and Miles' tense face spoke volumes. Eric's blood boiled, but he held his emotions in check, knowing the worst thing he could do in this situation was act rashly. Walking steadily toward the group, Eric introduced himself with calm authority. "Good afternoon, officers. Is there something I can help with?" He casually draped his jacket over his shoulder, the FBI badge pinned to it just barely visible. Reeves glanced at Eric, ignoring the badge at first. "Who are you?" "We're conducting a lawful stop here." Eric maintained his composure, though his tone grew firmer. "I'm Eric Bradley, a special agent with the FBI. This is my family, and I'd like to know exactly what's going on here." Reeves and Carter exchanged quick glances, the tension thickening. Eric's sharp tone and now clearly visible badge shifted the dynamics. But Reeves, stubborn and arrogant, decided not to back down. "This has nothing to do with your work at the FBI. We're responding to a legitimate report." Eric knew this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. He could feel the bias underpinning the officer's behavior, but he decided it was time to play it strategically. "All right, Sergeant. Here's what we'll do. I'll call the local FBI office to clarify this report. In the meantime, why don't you join us and explain everything calmly?" "I'm sure there's a good explanation for all this." Eric's measured but cutting response made Carter hesitate, but Reeves looked unwilling to relinquish control. Ridgemont wasn't just any small town. It was a microcosm of the complexities that plagued America, a place where generational divides and shifting demographics often clashed against deeply entrenched prejudices. Though modest in size, the town had its pockets of tension, particularly around issues of race and class. Eric had noticed this upon moving there, but he hadn't expected his family to be thrust into the middle of it so soon. Eric Bradley had a commanding presence that came from years of working undercover and dealing with high-stakes situations. At 42, He was tall and athletic, with an air of quiet authority that he rarely needed to enforce overtly. He had joined the FBI right out of college, determined to fight systemic corruption. But even with his credentials and achievements, he was acutely aware of the world. His children were growing up in a world that didn't always see their humanity before their skin color. Sharon, on the other hand, was the heart of the family. A former teacher turned children's book author, she was warm and approachable but fiercely protective when it came to her kids. Miles and Layla were her world, and she worked hard to ensure they felt confident and proud of who they were. Miles, at 15, was smart, observant, and increasingly aware of how others perceived him. Layla, a bundle of curiosity and energy, was still blissfully unaware of the harsher realities her parents often shielded her from. The tension between Sergeant Bill Reeves and Eric was palpable. Reeves was a man who had spent over 20 years on the force, his methods outdated and his views shaped by decades of unchallenged power. His partner, Josh Carter, was younger and less experienced, but not yet hardened by the same prejudices. Carter often second-guessed Reeves' judgment, but didn't have the courage to stand up to his senior officer. As Reeves prepared to dig his heels in, Eric decided to diffuse the situation by subtly asserting control. "Why don't we all step over to the benches over there?" Eric suggested, gesturing to a shaded picnic table nearby. His tone left no room for argument. The group moved reluctantly, with Reeves visibly annoyed at Eric's calm demeanor. Sharon shot Eric a grateful look, her trust in his ability to handle the situation unwavering. Miles, however, remained on edge, his fists clenched at his sides. As they sat down, Eric took the opportunity to probe. "Sergeant, you mentioned a report. What exactly was the nature of the complaint?" he asked, keeping his voice measured. Reeves hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "It was anonymous. Said there were people acting suspiciously in the park. We're just doing our job." Eric nodded slowly, pretending to accept the answer. He'd heard the same excuse countless times in his career, and knew it was often a cover for profiling. "Of course. I'm sure you understand, though, that this family picnic hardly seems like cause for concern." Carter shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Reeves for guidance. The younger officer's body language betrayed his unease, but Reeves maintained his combative stance. "Sometimes it's better to be safe than sorry," Reeves replied curtly. Eric decided to push further, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "Safe for whom, exactly?" "Because from where I'm sitting, my wife and children are the ones being treated like a threat." The weight of Eric's words hung heavy in the air. Carter looked down, his hand fidgeting with his belt. Reeves, however, leaned forward, his face hardening. "Look, I don't know how they handle things at the FBI, but around here, we don't take chances." Eric leaned back slightly, studying the older officer. His instincts told him that Reeves wasn't going to back down without a fight, not because of any genuine threat, but because his authority was being questioned. Meanwhile, Sharon subtly motioned for Miles to calm down, sensing his growing frustration. But the teenager's voice cut through the tension. "So, you're saying we look like criminals? That's why you're here?" "Miles," Eric said quietly, a warning in his tone. "No, Dad? They need to hear this." Miles' voice trembled with a mix of fear and defiance. "We're not doing anything wrong. Why do they keep looking at us like we don't belong?" The raw emotion in Miles' words seemed to hit Carter, who cleared his throat and finally spoke up. "Sir, maybe we should just wrap this up. I think we've cleared the area." Reeves glared at his partner, but didn't respond immediately. Sharon's eyes darted between the two officers, her pulse quickening. Eric seized the moment. "That's a good idea, Officer Carter. Why don't you take this opportunity to de-escalate the situation?" "I'm sure we all have better things to do with our day." Carter nodded, and for a brief moment it seemed like the encounter might end peacefully. But Reeves wasn't ready to give up his control. "This isn't over," Reeves muttered, standing up abruptly. He cast one last withering glance at Eric before walking back to the patrol car. Carter hesitated, then followed, his shoulders slumped. As the officers drove away, Eric watched them go, his jaw tight. Sharon placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. "It's not over. Eric repeated under his breath, but this time his words carried a promise. The next morning, Eric sat at the kitchen table, sipping his coffee as he scrolled through his work emails. Sharon bustled around, packing lunch for the kids while Layla hummed a song at the counter. Miles, however, sat silently, poking at his cereal. Eric noticed his son's unusually quiet demeanor and set his mug down. "You okay, buddy?" Miles shrugged, but didn't look up. "Why do people think we're a threat, Dad?" he finally asked, his voice soft but heavy with meaning. Eric exchanged a glance with Sharon, who paused mid-motion. The question hung in the air, its weight undeniable. Eric leaned forward. "Sometimes people let fear or ignorance guide their actions. It doesn't make it right, but it's the world we live in. That's why we stand tall and prove them wrong every single day." Miles nodded, though he didn't seem entirely convinced. Sharon placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Your dad's right, Miles. You're strong, smart, and capable. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Just as the atmosphere began to settle, Eric's phone buzzed on the table. The name on the screen caught his eye. Director Wallace. "Everything okay?" Sharon asked as Eric stood and answered the call. "I don't know yet," Eric replied, walking into the next room. On the other end, Director Wallace wasted no time. "Bradley, we've received a report about an incident involving you and some local officers yesterday. I need to know what's going on." Eric felt a wave of frustration rise. He'd planned to report the incident himself, but hadn't expected the local precinct to act so quickly or so dishonestly. "What exactly did they report?" Wallace hesitated before replying. "They claim you interfered with an ongoing investigation. The sergeant in charge said you were obstructive and disrespectful." Eric closed his eyes, taking a deep breath to steady himself. "That's not how it happened. They approached my family without cause. It was blatant profiling. I figured as much," Wallace said, his tone softening. "Listen, I trust you, but this is getting traction. The local department is pushing for an internal review, and they're painting you as the aggressor. I suggest you document everything and tread carefully." Eric ended the call and returned to the kitchen, his mind already racing. If the local department was escalating the situation, it meant they were covering for someone likely Reeves. "I need to make some calls," Eric said to Sharon, his voice clipped. Meanwhile, at the Ridgemont Police Department, Sergeant Reeves sat in his office, stewing. The confrontation at the park had rattled him more than he wanted to admit. The idea of being challenged by someone like Eric, a black man who didn't cower under authority, fueled his simmering resentment. "Carter," Reeves barked, and the younger officer hurried into the office. "Yes, sir?" Reeves leaned back in his chair, his expression sharp. "Pull everything we've got on that guy Bradley. I don't care if it's a parking ticket or a late library book. I want something on him." Carter hesitated, his discomfort evident. Sir, he's with the FBI." I don't pay you to think, Carter," Reeves snapped. "Just do what I say." Carter nodded reluctantly and left the room, but the unease in his gut only grew. He didn't like the way this was unfolding, and for the first time, he began to seriously question whether he was on the right side. Back at the Bradley home, Eric was in full investigator mode. He'd already contacted a colleague at the FBI's Civil Rights Division to flag the incident and was now combing through public records on the Ridgemont PD. "Find anything?" Sharon asked as she walked into the room with a cup of tea. Eric glanced up from his laptop. "Plenty. Reeves has a history of complaints, excessive force, racial bias, but nothing ever sticks. Looks like he's been shielded by the department for years." Sharon frowned, her anger bubbling beneath the surface. "So what do we do?" Eric's jaw tightened. "We expose him, but we have to be smart about it." Later that day, Miles came home from school looking shaken. Eric immediately noticed the change in his son's demeanor. "What happened?" Eric asked, his tone serious. Miles hesitated before pulling a crumpled piece of paper from his backpack. It was a flyer with Eric's face on it, accompanied by the words, "Who's really protecting you? FBI agent Eric Bradley under investigation." Eric felt a surge of anger as he scanned the flyer. "Where did you get this?" "They were all over school," Miles said quietly. Some kids were saying you're dangerous. Eric's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm for Miles' sake. This is their attempt to intimidate us, Eric said, his voice steady. But they don't know who they're dealing with. Eric realized this was no longer just about defending his family. It was about taking a stand against a broken system and ensuring no one else had to endure what they were experiencing. The next morning, Eric was up before sunrise, sitting in his office, surrounded by files, photos, and a whiteboard filled with notes. The night before, after tucking Layla into bed and reassuring Miles, he had stayed up late compiling a timeline of the harassment they'd experienced and cross-referencing it with complaints against Sergeant Reeves. He had two priorities: protect his family and expose the systemic corruption shielding officers like Reeves. At the local coffee shop, conversations about the Bradleys were beginning to swirl. The flyers targeting Eric had found their way onto notice boards, car windshields, and even some storefronts. The whispers ranged from sympathy to suspicion. Among the concerned voices was Angela Martinez, a local high school teacher and friend of Sharon. Angela had seen the flyers and immediately called Sharon. "Have you seen these?" Angela asked, her voice trembling with indignation. "This is disgusting. How are you holding up?" Sharon sighed, her exhaustion evident even over the phone. "We're hanging in there, but it's hard. Eric's handling it, but it's a lot for the kids, especially Miles." Angela paused before speaking again, a note of determination in her voice. "You're not alone in this. If they think they can silence you, they're wrong. I know others who would want to help." Sharon was touched, but wary. "Angela, this is dangerous. I don't want anyone else getting caught in the crossfire." Angela, however, was resolute. "This isn't just about your family. It's about all of us." Angela's words planted a seed. While Eric prepared his legal and tactical strategies, Sharon began thinking about how to rally the community to push back against the injustice. Meanwhile, Officer Carter found himself at a crossroads. The deeper he dug into Eric's records, the more he realized how clean they were. There was no dirt to find, and yet Reeves was relentless in his vendetta. Carter confided in another officer, Karen Daniels, during a coffee break. "I don't like where this is going," Carter admitted. Karen, a veteran officer with a reputation for fairness, raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, Reeves." Carter nodded. "He's pushing me to dig up dirt on this FBI agent, but there's nothing there. And those flyers? That's a step too far." Karen leaned in, lowering her voice. "You're not the only one questioning him. Reeves has been skating on thin ice for years. You think those complaints against him just disappeared? He's got friends in high places. But if someone were to expose him..." Carter hesitated. "You mean me?" Karen nodded. "Think about it. If Reeves goes down, he's taking the whole corrupt crew with it. But it's risky. You have to decide if it's worth it." Back at the Bradley home, Sharon was on a video call with Angela and a few other community leaders, including a pastor, a local business owner, and a youth mentor. "We need to make this bigger than just one family," Angela said passionately. "If we come together, we can demand accountability." Sharon, still hesitant, glanced at Eric, who had joined the call midway. He nodded, signaling his support. "I appreciate all of you," Sharon said, her voice steady but emotional. "But let's be smart about this. We don't want to give them an excuse to escalate." Eric chimed in. "Documentation and visibility are key. If we can prove a pattern of misconduct, we'll have a stronger case. I'll work on the legal side, but we'll need the community's voice too." The group agreed to organize a town hall meeting, giving residents a chance to share their own experiences and demand action. Meanwhile, Reeves was growing increasingly paranoid. He was aware that the Bradleys weren't backing down, and the town hall meeting had come to his attention. "We need to send a message," Reeves told Carter, his voice dripping with venom. "Something that'll remind everyone who's in charge." Carter was taken aback. "What do you mean?" Reeves smirked. "You'll see." That evening, as the Bradleys were having dinner, a loud crash shattered their peaceful moment. Eric rushed to the front door to find their mailbox smashed, with a spray-painted message on the driveway, "Stay in your lane." Sharon gasped, pulling Layla close, while Miles clenched his fists, his face red with anger. "This is too far," Sharon said, her voice shaking. Eric placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's exactly what they want, for us to be scared. But we're not going anywhere." Eric reported the incident to his FBI colleagues, escalating the situation to a formal federal inquiry. The vandalism had crossed the line from intimidation to a potential hate crime, and Eric knew it was only a matter of time before Reeves and his cronies slipped up even further. The community center was packed. Word of the town hall meeting had spread quickly, and residents from all walks of life showed up to voice their frustrations. Angela moderated the event, ensuring that each speaker had their turn. One by one, people came forward with stories of unfair treatment, intimidation, and blatant discrimination at the hands of the Ridgemont Police Department. When it was Eric's turn, he stood at the podium, the room falling silent. "My family and I moved here for peace, for community. But what we've experienced is a reminder that justice doesn't come automatically. It's something we have to fight for." His words struck a chord, and the crowd erupted in applause. The energy in the room was electric, but Eric remained focused. "This isn't just about us. It's about every family here, every child who deserves to feel safe in their own neighborhood. Together, we can demand better." The town hall was a turning point, but it also marked the moment when Reeves' desperation reached a breaking point. It was a quiet Friday night when Eric received an urgent call from Officer Karen Daniels. Her voice was low and cautious. "Agent Bradley, you need to know something. Reeves is planning something big. He's pulling strings to orchestrate a raid on your house under the pretense of an ongoing investigation." Eric's heart sank. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. Early. He's claiming probable cause based on fabricated evidence, something about illegal possession of firearms. It's a setup, and it's coming from him directly." Eric inhaled deeply, forcing himself to stay composed. "Thank you, Officer Daniels. I'll handle it." After ending the call, Eric immediately called his FBI colleagues, activating a contingency plan. He also informed Sharon, who nodded firmly, her resolve strengthened. "They want to bring the fight to our doorstep?" Sharon said. "Fine. Let's make sure the truth comes out." At 6 a.m., just as the sun was rising, multiple Ridgemont police vehicles arrived outside the Bradley home. Lights flashed, and officers exited with weapons drawn. Eric, dressed in a suit, calmly opened the door before they could knock. He stepped onto the porch, holding his badge high. "Special Agent Eric Bradley, FBI. This house is under federal jurisdiction." Reeves stepped forward, his face a mask of defiance. "That doesn't mean you're above the law, Bradley. We have a warrant." Eric remained calm, though his eyes burned with determination. "You mean the one you falsified? The FBI is already aware of your plan. You're walking into a trap of your own making." Before Reeves could respond, two black SUVs pulled up. Federal agents stepped out, led by Director Wallace himself. "Sergeant Reeves," Wallace said sternly, holding up a document. "This is a cease and desist order from the Department of Justice. You and your officers are hereby ordered to stand down." Reeves froze, his bravado crumbling as the other officers exchanged nervous glances. Carter stepped back, clearly unwilling to proceed further. "This is ridiculous." Reeves spat, his voice shaking. "He's manipulating the system." "No, Reeves," Wallace countered, stepping closer. "We have evidence of your misconduct, including your attempts to fabricate charges against Agent Bradley and his family." "You're done." As federal agents moved in, Reeves tried to resist, but Carter finally spoke up. "It's over, Bill. You went too far." Reeves turned on Carter, his face contorted with rage. "You spineless." Before he could finish, federal agents cuffed him. The other officers slowly lowered their weapons, the gravity of the situation sinking in. News of the raid and Reeves' arrest spread quickly. It became a national story, sparking debates about policing and accountability. Community members who had attended the town hall felt vindicated, their voices finally heard on a larger scale. Officer Carter, though initially hesitant, became a key witness in the investigation against Reeves. He provided crucial evidence about the sergeant's corrupt practices, leading to further arrests within the department. The Ridgemont Police Department faced a federal audit, and several high-ranking officials resigned under pressure. Karen Daniels was promoted, tasked with rebuilding trust between the department and the community. Weeks after the incident, Eric sat on the porch with Miles, watching the sunset. The ordeal had left its mark on the family, but they had emerged stronger. "You know," Miles said, breaking the silence, "for a while I was scared, but seeing you stand up to them, it made me feel like we can change things." Eric smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "Change doesn't come easy, Miles, but when we stand together and stay true to what's right, we can make a difference." Miles nodded, his expression resolute. "I want to help. Maybe one day I can do what you do." Eric's chest swelled with pride. "You can do anything, son." Sharon's efforts with Angela and the community bore fruit. The town hall meetings became a regular occurrence, fostering open dialogue between residents and local authorities. New programs were implemented to address systemic issues, and Ridgemont began to slowly heal. Eric and Sharon knew the battle wasn't over. There were still larger fights to be won, but for now, they found solace in the progress they had made. The fallout from the raid and Reeves' arrest rippled far beyond Ridgemont. The town became a symbol of both the dangers of unchecked authority and the power of community-driven change. For Eric and his family, however, the aftermath was deeply personal. Eric sat across from Director Wallace in a quiet office at the FBI field headquarters. Wallace regarded him with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "You handled yourself well, Bradley," Wallace began. "Not many people would have kept their composure under those circumstances." Eric nodded, but didn't relax. "It wasn't just about me. This kind of thing happens to families like mine all the time, and most don't have the resources or connections to fight back." Wallace leaned back in his chair. "Which is exactly why we're launching a task force to investigate systemic abuses in law enforcement. Your case brought this to light, and we want you on the team." Eric hesitated, thinking about his family. After a moment, he spoke. "I'll do it on one condition. I want to be involved in outreach. Not just policy, but working with communities to rebuild trust." Wallace smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." At the Ridgemont Community Center, Angela Martinez stood at the front of a packed room. The energy was different, this time hopeful, determined. Sharon sat in the audience, smiling as Angela introduced Eric to the crowd. "Today, we're here to recognize a family that stood up for justice, even when it wasn't easy. Eric Bradley, Sharon Bradley, and their kids showed us all the power of resilience and unity." Eric stepped forward, the room erupting in applause. He took a moment to scan the crowd before speaking. "This isn't about me," Eric began. "It's about all of you, every person who came forward, who shared their stories, who demanded better. Change doesn't happen in isolation. It happens when people come together." As the applause grew louder, Miles watched from the front row, a small smile on his face. He saw his father not just as a hero, but as an example of what integrity and courage could achieve. Months later, Sergeant Bill Reeves stood trial, facing multiple charges ranging from falsifying evidence to civil rights violations. Officer Carter testified against him, his testimony a pivotal piece of the case. In a packed courtroom, Reeves was found guilty on all counts. The verdict sent a powerful message, not just to Ridgemont, but to law enforcement agencies across the country. Eric and Sharon attended the trial, sitting quietly as the judge delivered the sentence. When it was over, Eric turned to Sharon. "One less wolf in the pack," he said softly. Sharon nodded, but her expression remained somber. "It's a start. Back at home, the Bradleys began to rebuild their sense of normalcy. Layla returned to her carefree ways, often spending hours drawing pictures of her family as superheroes. Miles became more active in school, joining debate club and writing articles for the student newspaper about justice and equality. Sharon resumed her work as an author, inspired to write a children's book about standing up to injustice. Eric found solace in spending more time with his family, though his work with the FBI's new task force kept him busy. One evening, Eric and Sharon sat together on the porch, watching the kids play in the yard. "Do you think we made a difference?" Sharon asked, leaning her head on Eric's shoulder. Eric took a deep breath, his eyes following Miles and Layla as they laughed together. "I think we showed them that the fight isn't over." And that's a start. Inspired by the Bradleys' story, other towns began organizing their own community meetings to address issues of bias and accountability. Journalists continued to cover the case, sparking a national dialogue about the need for systemic reform. In Ridgemont, Officer Karen Daniels implemented new training programs for the police department, focusing on de-escalation and community engagement. Trust wasn't rebuilt overnight, but small steps began to bridge the divide. The consequences of that summer's events were far-reaching, but for the Bradleys, the most important victory was the knowledge that they had stood their ground and inspired others to do the same. Months after the turmoil had subsided, Eric found himself reflecting on the journey his family had endured. The adversity they faced had tested their resilience, but it also revealed a strength they hadn't known they possessed. Now, Eric was determined to ensure that their experiences would lead to meaningful change, not just for themselves, but for others as well. Miles had always been a sharp and curious teenager, but the incident with the police had ignited a fire within him. He began taking an active role in the community, joining local youth advocacy groups and speaking at events about his experience. One evening, Miles approached Eric in the living room, holding a notebook filled with handwritten notes. "Dad, can you read this?" Miles asked, his voice tentative. Eric took the notebook and began skimming. It was a speech, passionate and eloquent, addressing the importance of equality and the courage to stand up for justice. "This is powerful, Miles," Eric said, setting the notebook down. "You've got a voice, and people are going to listen." Miles nodded, a small smile forming. "I learned from you. Watching how you handled everything, it made me realize I want to make a difference too." Eric felt a swell of pride as he placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "You already are, son." Sharon's involvement with the community deepened as well. Her children's book, The Day We Stood Tall, became a hit in local schools, teaching young readers about bravery and standing up against injustice. During a book signing at a Ridgemont library, a young girl approached Sharon, clutching a copy of the book. "Mrs. Bradley, your book made me feel brave," the girl said shyly. Sharon knelt down to the girl's level, her heart swelling with emotion. "You are brave," Sharon said with a warm smile. "And don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The interaction reminded Sharon of why she had written the book in the first place, to inspire the next generation to believe in their power to create change. Eric's work with the FBI's task force was demanding, but it gave him a renewed sense of purpose. He traveled across the country, speaking at law enforcement conferences and consulting on cases of systemic abuse. At one conference, a young officer approached him after his presentation. "Agent Bradley," the officer began nervously, "how do you deal with the pressure, knowing that so many people are counting on you to get it right?" Eric regarded the officer thoughtfully before responding. "You remember why you started. You focus on the people who need you the most and trust that doing the right thing will make a difference, even if it's just one life at a time." The officer nodded, clearly moved by Eric's words. The Bradleys had always been close, but the challenges they faced brought them even closer. Dinner conversations were livelier, filled with laughter and meaningful discussions about their hopes for the future. One evening, as the family sat around the table, Miles announced that he wanted to start a podcast to discuss social issues. Layla chimed in with her own idea of creating art that represented equality and unity. Eric and Sharon exchanged a proud look, realizing that their children were carrying forward the values they had fought to protect. At a community event months later, the Bradleys were recognized for their courage and leadership. Angela Martinez presented them with a plaque inscribed with the words, "For standing tall and inspiring us all." As Eric accepted the plaque, he turned to the crowd. "This isn't just about us," he said. "It's about what we can accomplish together." Ridgemont showed that change is possible when we stand united. "Let's keep building on that." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers a testament to the impact the Bradleys had made. As the family drove home that evening, Layla fell asleep in the back seat, clutching a small ribbon she had received at the event. Miles looked out the window, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Do you think things will really change, Dad?" Miles asked quietly. Eric glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "They already have, Miles. Change isn't always big and dramatic. Sometimes it's in the little things, people treating each other with more kindness, speaking up when it matters. But those little things add up." Miles nodded, his determination renewed. As the Bradleys pulled into their driveway, Eric felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to face it together, stronger than ever. Despite the progress made in Ridgemont, the Bradleys and the community knew the fight was far from over. The public spotlight on Sergeant Reeves' trial and the subsequent investigations had exposed systemic issues in the town's police department. However, deeper reforms required sustained effort and unwavering courage. Eric received an encrypted email from a trusted colleague in the FBI's cyber division. The subject line read, "Urgent, eyes only." The message detailed chatter from extremist groups online. Reeves' arrest and the subsequent backlash against the Ridgemont Police Department had fueled a small but dangerous group intent on retaliating against those responsible for tarnishing law enforcement. Eric's brow furrowed as he read further. The group had been tracking families involved in community activism, including his own. Sharon noticed his tense expression as he stared at the screen. "What's wrong?" she asked. Eric turned the laptop toward her. "We may have stirred up more than we expected. They're monitoring us, Sharon." Sharon's face hardened. "So, what do we do?" Eric closed the laptop, his voice firm. "We stay vigilant, but we don't back down. I'll make sure we have extra protection. This isn't going to scare us into silence." The community, emboldened by the success of the town hall meetings, had organized a march to demand sweeping reforms within the Ridgemont Police Department. The event was set to take place downtown, with speakers from across the region joining in solidarity. Eric and Sharon were invited to speak, along with Angela Martinez and Karen Daniels. Miles had even prepared a short speech of his own, his voice becoming an important symbol for the younger generation. The night before the march, the Bradleys sat together in the living room, reviewing their plans. Miles practiced his speech aloud, while Layla worked on posters to carry during the march. "I'm proud of you, Miles," Eric said after his son finished his speech. "This isn't easy, but you're standing up for what's right." Miles smiled shyly. "I just want people to understand that we're all in this together. It's not about fighting, it's about making things better." Sharon placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "And that's exactly why your voice matters." While the Bradleys and the community prepared for the march, threats against the event began to surface online. Eric, in collaboration with the FBI, worked behind the scenes to ensure the march would proceed safely. Extra security measures were put in place, including plainclothes agents mingling with the crowd. Despite the precautions, Eric couldn't shake a sense of unease. He knew from experience how volatile these situations could become. "You think something's going to happen tomorrow, don't you?" Sharon asked as they prepared for bed. Eric sighed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances." Sharon sat beside him, her hand resting on his. "We've come this far, Eric. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The day of the march dawned bright and clear, the streets of Ridgemont buzzing with energy. People of all ages and backgrounds gathered downtown, carrying signs with messages of unity and justice. Eric scanned the crowd, his trained eyes alert for anything out of place. Sharon stood by his side, holding Layla's hand, while Miles joined a group of his friends near the front of the procession. Angela Martinez took the microphone first, her powerful voice rallying the crowd. "Today, we stand as one. No more fear, no more silence. Together, we demand accountability and fairness for everyone in this town." Cheers erupted as Angela stepped back, passing the microphone to Karen Daniels. As Karen spoke about the importance of integrity in law enforcement, Eric noticed a man in the crowd acting suspiciously. He wore a hoodie despite the warm weather and kept glancing at his phone. Eric's instincts kicked in. He quietly signaled to a nearby plainclothes agent, pointing toward the man. Just as Miles stepped onto the stage to deliver his speech, the suspicious man moved toward the stage. Eric's heart pounded as he began weaving through the crowd, his eyes locked on the potential threat. Miles started speaking, his voice clear and steady. "We can't change the past, but we can shape the future. And that future starts with all of us." The man reached into his pocket. Eric surged forward, grabbing his arm just as he pulled out a smoke canister. "FBI, drop it," Eric barked, twisting the man's arm and forcing him to the ground. Gasps rippled through the crowd as agents swarmed the area, quickly apprehending the man. The canister rolled harmlessly to the side, but the tension in the air was palpable. Miles paused, his eyes wide as he watched his father in action. After a moment, he stepped closer to the microphone, his voice unwavering. "And that future starts with all of us refusing to be silenced, refusing to let fear win." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers drowning out the lingering tension. Eric looked up at his son, a swell of pride washing over him. Despite the scare, Miles had stood firm, a testament to the resilience and courage the family had cultivated together. The march continued without further incident, its success a powerful statement of unity and determination. Eric's actions had averted a potential disaster, but it was Miles' words that truly galvanized the crowd. That night, as the Bradleys returned home, they knew they had reached a turning point, not just for their family, but for the entire community. The march's success was still echoing through Ridgemont when the Bradleys received an unexpected visitor at their doorstep the following evening, Karen Daniels. She carried an envelope and looked grim as Eric invited her inside. "We found something," Karen said, placing the envelope on the table. "You need to see this." Eric opened it and pulled out several documents. They were heavily redacted police reports and emails, but one thing stood out: evidence that Sergeant Reeves had connections to the extremist group that had targeted the Bradleys in the march. "This proves Reeves didn't just orchestrate the harassment against you," Karen explained. "He was using his position to protect these groups, feeding them information about investigations and resources to avoid detection." Eric's jaw tightened as he scanned the documents. "This isn't just corruption. It's domestic terrorism," Karen nodded. "We're sharing this with federal prosecutors. But there's more. The group is planning something big, a coordinated attack to retaliate for Reeves' conviction. We need your help to stop it." Over the next 48 hours, Eric and his FBI colleagues worked tirelessly to dismantle the extremist cell. Using Karen's intel and further investigations, they identified the group's safe house on the outskirts of town. The operation would require precision and coordination to avoid casualties and neutralize the threat. Eric's dual role as a father and federal agent weighed heavily on him. Sharon watched as he packed his gear the night before the raid, her expression a mix of pride and worry. "Be careful," she said, her voice soft. Eric kissed her forehead. Always, the raid began just before dawn. Eric, equipped with tactical gear and leading a team of agents, approached the heavily fortified building. Inside, the extremist group was preparing for their next move, unaware that law enforcement was closing in. The air was thick with tension as the team moved silently, surrounding the property. At Eric's signal, the agents breached the doors, flashbangs disorienting the occupant. Chaos erupted inside as the group scrambled to defend themselves, but the FBI's preparation paid off. Within minutes, key members were subdued, weapons confiscated, and plans seized. Eric confronted the group's leader, a gaunt man with a defiant sneer. "This ends here," Eric said, his voice steely. The man's expression faltered, realizing the extent of the operation. As the raid concluded, one agent approached Eric with a laptop recovered from the scene. The screen displayed emails between the group and an anonymous contact, someone still within the Ridgemont Police Department. "They've got another insider," the agent said grimly. Eric's mind raced. The raid had been a success, but the network wasn't fully dismantled. Someone within the department was still working against them, potentially sabotaging the progress the community had fought so hard to achieve. "This isn't over," Eric muttered. While Eric was in the field, Miles took to the airwaves, launching the first episode of his podcast, Voices of Change. His inaugural topic, the march, his family's journey, and the importance of standing up for justice. With Sharon's help, Miles live-streamed the episode, drawing hundreds of viewers from Ridgemont and beyond. His words were raw, passionate, and unapologetic. "We can't let fear define us," Miles said into the microphone. "We have to be the ones to push back, to demand better, and to protect each other." The episode quickly went viral, earning praise from both local activists and national figures. For Miles, it wasn't just about sharing his story, it was about empowering others to share theirs. That evening, Eric returned home, exhausted but determined. He gathered his family around the table, explaining the discovery of the anonymous insider. "This person is still out there, undermining everything we've worked for," Eric said. "But they've underestimated us." Karen Daniels, who had joined them for the briefing, added, "The department is already shaken. If we expose this insider, it could finally tip the scales." The next day, Eric and Karen met with federal prosecutors, sharing the new evidence and launching an internal sting operation to identify the mole. Weeks of careful monitoring led to a breakthrough. The mole was a high-ranking officer who had been protecting Reeves and his network from the start. The arrest of the insider sent shockwaves through Ridgemont, signaling the collapse of the corruption that had plagued the department for years. With the extremist group dismantled, the insider exposed, and systemic reforms underway, the Bradleys could finally breathe a sigh of relief. At a community celebration held in the park where the story had begun, Eric, Sharon, Miles, and Layla were honored for their courage and resilience. Miles took the stage once again, addressing the crowd with the confidence of someone far beyond his years. "We didn't choose this fight," Miles said, "but we chose to face it together. And because of that, we're stronger. Ridgemont is stronger." The crowd erupted in cheers, their unity a testament to the change that had been sparked. As the Bradleys walked home that night under the stars, Eric looked at his family with a deep sense of pride and gratitude. The journey had been harrowing, but they had emerged on the other side not just as survivors, but as catalysts for a brighter future. Months passed, and the changes in Ridgemont were undeniable. The police department, once a symbol of fear and corruption for many, had been restructured under the leadership of Karen Daniels. Training programs on de-escalation and implicit bias were implemented, and community liaisons ensured a continuous dialogue between the residents and law enforcement. The Bradleys found themselves at the heart of a movement that extended beyond Ridgemont, inspiring other communities to address systemic issues. Eric's work with the FBI's task force gained momentum, leading to significant policy changes and accountability measures at both local and national levels. For Miles, his podcast grew into a platform for young voices, amplifying stories of resilience and hope. Layla, still the family's bright and creative spirit, illustrated a mural in the town square celebrating unity and justice, capturing the essence of what her family had fought for. One evening, as the family gathered on their porch, Eric received a call from Director Wallace. "Bradley, congratulations are in order," Wallace said. "You've been promoted to lead the task force. Your work has been exemplary." Eric thanked him, but turned his attention back to his family. As proud as he was of his career, he knew that his greatest accomplishment was standing by Sharon, Miles, and Layla through everything they had endured. "We did it together," Eric said, smiling at Sharon. The park where it all began was now a place of celebration rather than tension. The community center bustled with activity as Angela Martinez and other leaders continued organizing events to foster unity. At one such gathering, a large banner hung above the entrance, reading, "Ridgemont Strong, a community united." Sharon's children's book had become a bestseller in the region, with proceeds supporting programs for underprivileged youth. Miles' podcast reached national recognition, with high-profile figures joining him to discuss meaningful change. One Saturday morning, Eric and Miles worked side by side in the garage, fixing an old bicycle for Layla. "You've got a talent for this kind of work," Eric said, handing Miles a wrench. Miles grinned. "Guess I take after you, huh?" Eric chuckled, the bond between father and son stronger than ever. Sharon called them in for breakfast, the smell of pancakes filling the air. The family sat around the table, laughter and warmth replacing the tension and fear that had once lingered there. "We've come a long way," Sharon said, raising her coffee mug. Eric nodded, his gaze sweeping over his family. "And we've got so much more to look forward to." Years later, Ridgemont was unrecognizable from the town it had once been. The Bradleys had become pillars of the community, their story a testament to the power of resilience and unity. Miles, now in his early 20s, stood in front of a packed auditorium, preparing to deliver a keynote speech on youth, leadership, and activism. Eric and Sharon watched proudly from the front row, Layla beside them, with a sketch pad in hand. As Miles began to speak, his words echoed the lessons his family had instilled in him. Change doesn't come easy, but it starts with a choice to stand together, to speak up, and to never back down. The applause was thunderous, a reminder that their journey had left an indelible mark, not just on Ridgemont, but on everyone who heard their story. This story isn't just about one family or one community. It's a reminder of the power we all have to create change. Share your story, lift others up, and stand firm in the face of adversity. Together, we can make a difference.